Welcome back to another episode of the Football Fitness Federation podcast. This is episode 87. I'm delighted today to be joined by Gary Ward, the creator of Anatomy in Motion, easy for me to say, and the Flow Motion model, and also the author of the book, What the Foot. So Gary, thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks so much, Ben, for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
I am as well. This has been one I've been thoroughly looking forward to. I think there's loads of ways we can go with this episode. But I've just mentioned there, Gary, your company, but also some of your previous work in terms of the book. But you just want to take us back and take us through your journey so far.
Okay. Yes, absolutely. My journey is actually quite well explained on many podcasts. So I'll keep that kind of brief because I know there's probably other things that we can do. But I basically fell into anatomy through ski boot fitting, and the ski boot fitting side of things was quite an unbelievable shift in my life, because I spoke languages, which I ended up in the Alps, but I loved skiing, and I was skiing because of I had to stop playing football, not of any significant level, but because of continuous ankle sprains. And ankle sprains started sorting themselves out, putting them in ski boots and just doing something completely different. But the ski boot story, over 3 days, I had two guys and one company come in, and they showed us how to build orthotics. They introduced us to the foot. They showed me a foot skeleton. They told me what the bones were called, and they told me how to look at the shape and what to do with it if it's in a ski boot. So in a ski boot, if the foot's collapsed, you'll feel it on the inside of the foot. You'll feel the little toe push out into the corner of the boot. If you have the boot size wrong, you'll feel the top of the foot move into the first part of the ski boot, and just all these little enjoyable things I could pick up on. I liked to be good at what I do. So people would come in, and they would say it hurts here, here, and here, and I would go, well, that's because your foot's in this position. And then we'd adjust it by making an orthotic, what we called an insole, and all of a sudden people's feet were comfortable, but then they would instantly report one of two things: that their performance on the day's skiing was better than normal. So the instructor would be like, what have you done today? You're skiing so much better. It's like, I just had my insoles done. And the other one was, people would come in and say, I didn't have back pain today. Okay, no back pain. All we did was, move that bone in your foot, or I didn't even move a bone in the foot back then. We just organised an insole, and the foot sits a bit differently, but obviously took pressure off the back. And this was a huge kind of layer of inquisition. So it kick-started my desire to look more into anatomy, because I just knew the 33 joints in the foot, the 26 bones. But ironically, at the time, I didn't realise that I knew that when nobody else seemed to. So as I then went and did my personal training program, and a 3 months course, I argued with myself about whether I should go back to uni. I didn't really want to go back to uni, so I didn't do the physio route, didn't do the podiatry route, or any of those things that were appealing at the time. I just went and got a personal training qualification. Just thought I'd just start there, and I can keep the ski, and I keep the ski boot fitting. But eventually, the fascination in anatomy just became too much, and bigger than the skiing even. So over the years, I always got people that needed help. I never got somebody asking me to be massive or wanted to train for size, right? That's because you look at me and you go, that probably makes sense. But they definitely, and I always had an affinity with pain and discomfort, loads of injuries, loads of problems, and always working on myself. So that was my client. And of course, I would do courses and go to courses, and it would always be these solutions. And so I'd take this solution for that problem, and it wouldn't help. So I don't know if that was just fate, like pointing its finger at me. I'm sure other people got results, but I'd go, this doesn't, either I'm doing it wrong, they're doing it wrong, or it doesn't work. And I just needed to uncover some things. So it just led me on this inquisitive journey all the time. And at the same time, my own physical problems were also not being helped by anybody. So it took me a long time. And a big part of what I do today is I'm really passionate about helping people take ownership of their own body in the way that I did, because I don't know if anyone else can fix a person. So a big part of what I do is to help people and learn about themselves so they can look after themselves. And obviously, then we're speaking now to sports scientists and therapists and S&C coaches and stuff. But these are the people who hold the power to shine the light on people's problems so that they can understand them and then do their exercises or homework and obviously get a nice result at the end. But it all started with the feet. And so I began to and continued to build up. Now I understand foot movement. What does that mean for the rest of the body? And I've said this before. I always go back to this lady who had peroneal pain, lateral lower limb pain. It was definitely peroneal. And I was asking her to do something, rotate her body to the left as an assessment, I think. And all I could see was her foot just doing this. And I thought, well, that's got to be pulling on that tissue on the outside of the leg. If that was in a ski boot, what would I want to do? So what I did was I would, as an orthotic, if someone's foot's flying off the ground, you might just fill the space here so that the foot sits and the rear foot can sit neutral and take the pressure off the back of the leg. So I just shoved a load of yoga mat underneath there and got her to rotate. And she had one of these kind of euphoric light bulb. I had the light bulb. She had the euphoric moment of all her pain disappearing. And I was like, I don't know what just happened there, but that was pretty marvelous. So took the this idea of, can I recreate the orthotic idea in human movement and start to map the journey that goes up the leg. At the time, obviously, this was 2005, 6. There was a lot of three-dimensional talk going on, a lot of sling systems at the time, which obviously later on has now become kind of anatomy trains and fascial lines. But originally there were sling systems, longitudinal sling system. I don't know if you remember those, deep longitudinal, lateral. Can't even remember the names anymore. But I was starting to see these patterns in people's bodies and being able to relate them down to the foot. So just started documenting what I was seeing. And eventually the curiosity was big enough to start to document the walking cycle. So there were some people out there at the time who would talk about front leg and back leg gait, one leg in front of the other, and that the body would adopt this position. And my curiosity was, how do we get from being the front leg to that front leg becoming the back leg and then becoming the front leg again, and ended up unraveling the whole gait cycle. So the flow motion model was what I called it. It was a play on words, flow motion, because we're looking at it slowed down, slow motion, but also how the body flows effortlessly and efficiently through the walking cycle. And I had no idea at the time that it would lead to an understanding and appreciation of the skeleton's. It basically outlines the skeleton's full movement potential if everything is moving at the same time, which is quite a big statement to make. But what we discovered is that a footstep, I walked people over force plates for 10 years continuously, and everybody falls into a bracket of 0.6 to 0.8 seconds for a footstep. And then when you look at the model, you look at when the heel hits the ground to when the heel hits the ground again. In fact, from when the heel hits the ground to when the toe leaves the ground, every single joint in your body has gone towards both end directions. So flexion and extension, adduction and abduction, internal and external rotation. Every single joint has gone to both of those end ranges in all three dimensions in 0.6 to 0.8 seconds. So I've always laughed because people go, how do I, what are you looking for in gait? And I'm like, absolutely nothing. You're not going to see it. You're going to see a pelvis like bounce around or lean to the left a little bit. but we actually end up with a description of every joint's journey through that piece, and then taking snapshots in there. So when the heel hits the ground, what's the whole body shape? When the foot's flat on the ground, what's the whole body shape? When you're toeing off, what's the whole body shape? And what are there any relationships here? And it's, I've got to say, it's been an absolutely incredible journey. So with a burning desire to get something out there, I'd already started teaching courses, teaching in England, a couple of invites around just through natural connections and Facebook and stuff like that. But I needed to write What the Foot, and I didn't know I was going to call it that until the very end. But
I love the title.
I wrote an article called What the Foot, actually. Yeah, it's been very effective. I wrote an article called What the Foot a long time ago, before that, from magazine, Multi-Tracks magazine. There's a throwback. And anyway, that obviously became the title at the end. But so in the book, it was, I wanted to help people understand and see what I was seeing, just for no other reason. The value that I was getting, and the case studies that are in the book are a little bit kind of wow, and that's because they were wow. Because when people's pain and discomfort disappears because you do something that makes sense with how their bones should articulate and move when they walk, and you give them that possibility back, and the pressure comes off an area and they feel fantastic, you just want to let people know. And then people wanted to know, and so then we just had groups of people saying, can you teach us a bit? So we taught a little bit, and I needed to give people rules. What are the guidelines that I'm doing, what's going on in here that I need to help people understand? And so we came up with the 5 rules. I say we, I was very much on my own at the time. I came up with the 5 rules, and the 5 rules are that muscles lengthen before they contract. And so when you're walking, your muscles will never shorten to move a joint first. They'll always lengthen. If you fall forward as a skeleton, then tissue will open and lengthen. And so what that actually means is that by the time a muscle actually contracts, it's contracting from a lengthened position. Whereas for most of my educated life at that time, and even now, I think in a strength and conditioning or a personal training or just a training arena, most of the thing was, let's get you contracting from neutral. So from neutral to short, we'd be contracting tissue. But what I realize is when we're walking, the contraction happens from long back towards neutral. That you can see there's a real flip there. But you can watch it on animals. Like loads of people start Googling cats jumping and lions running, and you see that it's always the same. Muscle is always lengthening as big joints open and then contracting back. And then through momentum, you don't actually need tissue to contract back to where joints are closed and short again. So this whole eccentric thing can really, but I've got a paper here on my desk somewhere that is all about how eccentric movement is dangerous and therefore bad. And I always go into, we call it evil. So pronation is evil. We'll talk about that later, I'm sure. Eccentric tissue load is evil. These are white scientific papers. And I go, it can't be evil because that's what we're doing. Just to walk to the bus stop, we're eccentrically loading tissue all the time. But of course, that if tissue tends to get injured if you overload it, and eccentrically is when it's lengthening and so that, I think that's when I can't remember what the specifics were, but I mean, a lot of science papers, they kind of just, this is for the sports scientists, but they kind of stop short. You got a little bit of something, people run with it. I'm sure the scientist who came up with the idea is kind of pulling his hair out going, that wasn't exactly what I meant. We're doing little bits at a time, trying to build forward. And so the model itself has also ruffled a few feathers in terms of what our scientific opinions are. You kind of go, well, we can dismiss that a little bit because this is what it would naturally do in gait. And we have a problem is if there's what it would naturally do when we're walking is what we're trying to stop it doing in our training, then we have a huge dichotomy there immediately whereby all of a sudden, but you're training that out of me to make me do this. And then we wonder why that leads on to people ending up in kind of discomfort. So the classics also in What the Foot, getting a bit sidetracked. So I was going to tell you about the 5 laws, but in the What the Foot, I preempt all of that with 10 rants. And so the whole knee over toe, knees pushing out, all of that stuff, static stretching. You don't see static stretching in gait. You don't see static movements or moments in gait. You don't see the knees push out when they're bending to keep a supinated foot in gait. So all these things that we've set, I think we've set them up as protective mechanisms to help people stay safe in these large environments. And the irony is that when we go out on the football pitch, is we're not going to be able to keep our knee there. We aren't going to be able to keep our arches high. And of course, if you keep arches high all the time, all you've got is that tissue then all of a sudden has nothing to do. And so real movement, what I discovered also through the gait cycle, is that real movement is about an exchange of movement where joints open and close on both sides and tissue lengthens and shortens. So we don't want to embed practices where we just stay short. And very quickly, you can go to a squat and you go, of course, when I'm squatting, I'm loading all the tissue in the back and then contracting from that lengthened position to come up. So a squat becomes more functional than trying to activate someone's glute by lying them on the front and having them just extend that hip. So there's obviously there's good stuff and there's stuff that can be built on and improved upon. Getting into looking at gait really helped to understand the closed chain aspect of our anatomy versus the what I'd say previously. I think a lot of the information that was being taught over however many years is coming from an open chain perspective. So just laying on a couch. So you can lay on a couch and lift your leg up, flex your hip, and you don't have to do anything else. You might posterior tilt the pelvis, bring the lumbar spine towards the bed, etc. But if you flex your hip when you're stood up, there is a whole chain of events that runs down the leg, from the hip flexing to the knee flexing to the ankle flexing to the foot pronating, unless you put a conscious twist in and you push the knee out and then it supinates. But either way, you've got 36 joints kicking in immediately, whereas laying on the couch is one. So would you rather study the impact of one and work on one, or would you rather appreciate the whole of the whole, which is to get them all? And so the model, which is effectively what we teach, is 5 phases of movement on the ground. So strike phase, suspension phase, which is when the strike phase, initial contact. Suspension phase is when the foot is on the ground. The loading phase, sorry. Then I have transition phase, which is what they call mid stance. Shift phase is where we take our weight from our left foot towards our right foot. But they would categorize that as like early heel rise. And then propulsion phase, we might call toe off, although it's not specifically, it's just a moment before when the metatarsal head is still on the ground. And then you have a swing phase, early swing phase, late swing phase, and then re-engage with the ground again. And it's through looking all of those where you start to see all of the vertebrae will open and close, flex and extend, they'll side bend left and right, or rotate left and right, all in a single footstep. So that's every possible movement in your spine, a single footstep. In a roundabout way, that brings us back to law number 2, which is joints act and muscles react. And so it ties in super close to the eccentric tissue load. But if we get into the idea that these joints are moving first, they're the joints that are pushing into tissue, which is encouraging tissue to open and lengthen, and then creating a demand from the brain to contract that tissue to protect the joints as they kind of move further and further away from their rest position and contract them back towards it. You'll start to see that happening through the walking cycle. So we're basically living on the edge. We're forever moving our joints to compromised positions and relying on our tissue to bring them back. And then we'll do it on the other side. And I kind of like that idea of living on the edge, because you're on the verge of anything could happen all the time. But the more centered we are, the more aligned we are. So we start to match normal language. We want alignment to be safe. The more aligned we are, the easier it is to do both sides of movement. If I have a tendency to lean towards one side, so that all my joints are stacked on one side, and this could be an unconscious decision because I sprained an ankle when I was 13 years old, And I realized that I can keep the pressure off that ankle by standing on my left leg. 20 years later, 20 years of being on my left leg, I'm all lopsided to one side. I'm actually talking about myself. What's happened is that I've got kind of set into a posture. So I'm not centered anymore. I'm imbalanced. I've got poor posture. I'm one side dominant, and it means that I favor one side, and it means that I cannot access the other side. And what we start to say is, you've actually, in order to achieve both sides, you've only got 0.6 to 0.8 seconds in that single footstep. So if I'm already left, I'm going to find it hard to go right. If my pelvis is rotated left, I'm going to find it hard to rotate it right. If my pelvis is tipped forward, I'm going to find it hard to posterior tilt. If my foot's flat, I'm not going to have the time to supinate it, etc., etc., etc. And so can we use the gait phases, the gait model, to be able to say, well, when does that pelvis rotate right that I can't do? When does that pelvis posterior tilt that you can't do? And what's happening in every other joint above and below that will help you to access that? And that's when you start to put them in the positions, and you'll see their injury. Well, you don't put that right leg forward anymore. You're not happy on that right leg. Your foot doesn't move on that right leg. Have you ever done anything to your right leg? Oh yeah, I damaged that ankle when I was 13. Yeah, okay, right. Well, if we work on that ankle, and that's when you kind of go, the person comes in, left ankle pain, left knee pain, left hip pain, it's getting worse. They're running out of ideas. I think I should do surgery. What do you think? And I'm looking at the right ankle, and they go, it's the left side. Okay, I know. but actually this right side has had some trauma. So what if we work with that? What if we're actually able to help you have confidence on your right leg, move those bones again, and then they start to use their right side better, and they start to take the pressure off the left side. And of course you start to find out that the left side is just overworked and underpaid. And has led to all of this trouble. So the other three rules, just the third rule is that everything orbits around center. And so that's that idea. If everything's too far left, it's never going to get right. And the more we can give the brain the opportunity to experience both sides of movement, but not in an isolated way, in a whole integrated way. And that's really about saying, can you be equally on your left leg and your right leg with every step you take? Then that's when the body can start to learn balance. It's a little bit different from stretching both sides out at the end of a session, or making sure that strength and length are incorporated around a rotator cuff or something. It's more about understanding what that rotator cuff's role is in the context of everything, and that's what I think the model really gives us. The brain is hardwired to know where that center point is. That's rule 5. So if you give it the tools that it needs, it simply seems to find its way towards, whether it's quick or long, it's going to work back towards that centered position. And then I've left rule 4 till the end, because that's the perceived, your I can't remember it, your posture, your current postures are your, what is law 4? Basically, it's the way you hold yourself. So your resting posture and your movement habits dictate your performance and your potential. So whereas I've got a sore knee, and we'll look at the knee and we'll see if we can flex it. We'll see if we can extend it. What we really need to do is look at the context of everything to see what pressure is showing up on the knee. And then there is a big shout out in the world, which is, don't, to use Perry Nicholson's phrase, stop chasing pain. Don't chase pain. So if your knee hurts, doesn't mean we have to work on the knee. Doesn't mean we have to treat the knee. We have to operate on the knee. We need to understand the knee's situation in the context of their everything, so that we can better understand it. And I think that's what the model really brings.
I think it's really fascinating, isn't it? Because there's two sort of sides to it. It's fascinating in the fact that you can focus on a different part of the body and have such an impact on a different area. But at the same time, when you're talking about movement, and especially how we move on a pitch, it makes sense, doesn't it? Like you say, lying prone on your front and lifting your leg up. We like to think we're not going to be doing that too much on a pitch, whereas we are going to be moving, jumping, sprinting, changing direction, all the different things that we're going to be doing. So
it has to be a fluidity, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And we see that with players, don't we? to use coach analogy, players move well and don't move so well. And that whole thing could be a completely different debate in terms of that language. But one thing I wanted to go on to now, Gary, and get your input on is, and again, a very, very common phrase used within football or possibly sport, is a player being injury prone. So are players injury prone, or does it tie back into exactly what you just talked about there?
It will tie back in. With an injury-prone player, let's say, so an injury-prone player is somebody who just gets hurt a lot, and it doesn't have to be the same part of the body. So that means somebody like Brian Robson used to dislocate his shoulders all the time. Other players, you'll find that it's a hamstring, it's an ankle, you can go on YouTube, Google a player, and you'll see little arrows of all their injuries, right? Which is just a shame. But I think that there's 4 areas of that I think about when I'm actually in treatment with somebody, and I'm looking back at their history timeline. And I look at the earliest injury. I look at the most impactful injury. I look at the injuries that have been untreated, which nearly everyone's got. Footballers less so, because everything gets treated. But those, I sprained my ankle, and within 6 days I was running on it again. So that's untreated or unconsidered. That's the 4th one. And so people are injury prone, not just footballers. But if you've had an early trauma, and I don't mean early 2 years old, it could just be your first one. You could have just gone through life completely happy, and then all of a sudden, bang, ankle's gone. So that again, ankle, I must look at my ankle. All of a sudden, if the, an ankle is huge. When you invert an ankle, you're moving the calcaneus, you're moving the talus, you're damaging ligamentous tissue, you're moving the fibula, and most of the time it will be strapped up and left to heal, let the bruising go, start to do some gentle write your name, then we might get up to being on a wobble board, etc. And then we're looking at strengthening. But unfortunately, strengthening and writing your name is not dealing directly with the anatomical structure, which can, believe it or not, be dealt with, where you can actually teach a fibula and a talus and a calcaneus and a forefoot all to articulate and move better again, so that they no longer have an ankle that remains in a sprained position. I'll be working with ankles that have been sprained, and they still lack fibular glide after 15 years. And that shouldn't be the case. It should be being dealt with straight away. We had a PITFL damage this season, where immediately the ankle was, the talus was in the wrong position, and we put it all back together to encourage the healing process like really quickly. I just think there's, whereas that the alternative to that was to leave it for 6 weeks. 6 weeks is a huge time to leave something out of position, and I think we can do a lot better on that front. What they reckon is that if you tape your 2 fingers together for a couple of hours, your brain starts to eliminate the idea that you've got 2 fingers. So the longer you're booted, plastered, strapped, not moving something, the brain will start to eliminate the idea that that's even a possible movement. And so what we end up coming up with all of the time is 2 things. One is we look for what's missing. We look for the movements that you stopped doing, which could be out of fear of movement, instructional to not move, just complete abandonment. There's all those phrases, kinesiophobia and stuff like that. And the other thing is that the player, the person, the injured, if they can't use those movements, they have to find others to make up for it. And that's the definition of the word compensate. if I lose something, I am compensated for it somewhere in another part, in this case of my anatomy. So the model, again, it highlights, let's just take one moment in time. So when the foot's flat on the ground, the whole body's stacked up on top of it. And as I said, we've got all of the joints in play. So all of the foot, the ankle, the knee, the hip, the pelvis, the lumbar spine, thoracic spine, shoulder girdle, cervical spine, everything can be, you can determine where everything should be at that moment in time for an optimal movement where all bones are moving equally. In the absence of equal, so I can't move one, I start to move something else more to compensate for it. And so in What the Foot, I actually talked about the body, the body always works at 100%. So you can't take anything away from it or add to it. So if I lose an ankle, for a crude way of looking at it, I'm going to have to use my knee more, my hip more, a rotation more. I will do something more. And it's in those more places where you tend to find people have problems. So that earliest injury, if it's not dealt with and they're back on the pitch and they're running and they're playing hard, all of a sudden they're playing hard using more stuff elsewhere, which may end up being the next area, which if they then, that gets quietened down, or you start to train that in a way where it's not specifically relevant. Now you've got the ankles taken out, the lumbar spine's taken out, and then it's a shoulder. And then you start getting all the little pictures all around. So injury prone is very, very interesting. I always want to go back and say, what happened first? What was the first thing? And of course, a lot of injury prone players sadly end up on the surgical table, and those, then sometimes the surgeries need dealing with as well. A lot of people's surgeries will, I'm not saying that they didn't need a surgery, but you often find that if I jump out of football briefly, somebody who had a hip replacement, you often find that someone had the hip replacement, but the structure that their body holds unconsciously when they walk is still being held post replacement.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So now you can go, actually can see why you probably needed your hip replacement. It feels good now, but we shouldn't leave you there, because you're now at the mercy of your old unconscious walking habit or movement habit. So if we can start to deal with that, then it will take the pressure off the other areas again. And it's a case of that, is this compensation thing is what we're doing. And when you're working at a really high level, a really hard level of intensity, training every day, playing hard a couple of times a week, then you are going to end up using stuff in the absence of being able to use others. It seems weird saying, running, not using your ankle, but you see it a lot. And you see it on force plates, and it can all be picked up and monitored.
Yeah, it's definitely just covering up an issue, I suppose, isn't it? It's like in a really simplified manner of having a headache and taking a pill to cover up the headache without working out why you've got the headache in the first place. So that for me, that's like the simplified version of it. But I think the surgery side of things is fascinating, because with football now, it's so accessible, especially for clubs at the top end. You could get injured on a Friday night and you could essentially be in, if they think you need it, you could be in surgery either that night or the Saturday morning. It's so fast.
Yeah.
But is it needed? I mean, that's the question that I've got for you. Like, a lot of the time, do you think it's needed, or are there ways and means around it?
Well, I think, first of all, we should be grateful that the possibility is there and that the skill set of those guys is off the chart. And I do sometimes wonder if things could have been done sooner in the process to take the pressure off something before it got to that stage, especially if it's what's the word? Especially if it's not impacted. Do you know what I mean? What's the word? It's just happened innocuously. So I'm just, when I'm running, I just feel it when I'm running. I've not had it's not like I took a huge tackle and everything's just gone to bits and that needs putting back together. But like a hamstring goes under no pressure. It's like that shouldn't be happening. It doesn't. I don't care what intensity you're working at. You're able to see that hamstring is doing way too much. And hamstrings can be tied into feet really quickly. I mean, that's a no-brainer comment, hopefully. Hamstring attaching down onto the lower limb itself below the knee, and then that at the mercy of rear foot movement and forefoot movement. And I don't think I've actually met a footballer who could supinate his foot in what I would define as a supinating foot. And so that means that most of them are, their movement range in their feet is small. And they spend a lot of time on these, and they put them in the football boots, and I think it would be a lovely thing for them to be able to do, is to actually have more movement in their feet, and it's really easily done. We have a program called Wake Your Feet Up, which basically we send it out. People come in and they buy it, and it's online, and we take them through a 2 to 3 hour program of teaching them how to use our wedges to move all the bones in their feet, and the knock-on effect of that in their bodies and then life is enormous. And if footballers could be doing that would be huge. It would take so much stress off their hamstrings, and that's just I'll just be sat in the garden having a cup of tea while they do that, following my video for £15, which is not even a drop. It's a drop in the ocean. So hopefully some of them will pick up on that. But it's that idea. There's definitely going to be so much more that can be done that isn't being done before you get to that decision. Now, obviously, if you're in season and something needs to happen now, a la Harry Kane, so we can make the Euros or the end of the season, etc., those decisions happen like that. But you would still want to go back and look at, the history, the ankle sprains, and start to work there in order to make sense of the bigger picture. And the hard part about that is the transition towards learning this way of looking at the body, I suppose, rather than just being able to go and do it on Monday morning. But there's definitely capacity in football to do that with players, I would say, for sure, given the amount of time that they do spend already. If it was spent in a way that was more considerate of that, you might even reduce that amount of time that people are needing to spend on players.
Yeah, there's a lot of factors that come into it, aren't there? Like you just said, in terms of rushing your leading goal scorer back and getting them back for key games and things like that. And
you get it, right?
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of money involved in it. There's fans that you've got to try and keep happy and all the rest of it. But it's just good to get your point of view on it. And you like to think that they just take that into consideration, don't you? That surgery isn't the only option, but looking at the big picture as a whole.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
And then what I wanted to move on to, Gary, I remember someone saying to me when I was playing, and I didn't play at a very good level at all, but when I was playing, someone said to me about looking after your tools. And by the tools, they meant your feet. And that was something that at that time went in one ear and went out the other ear, and was like, yeah, whatever. And I think that's what a lot of players do, isn't it? Like you mentioned before, spending so much time in boots and not looking after an area that essentially is so foundational to everything that we do. Yeah. So what would be some sort of practical tips, and we're talking more to coaches, but indirectly to players here as well, practical things that we can put into our week, into our day, that will help look after this really important area of our body?
I think I kind of already said it. For me, I was just thinking as you were talking, I don't think I've ever seen a footballer whose nails weren't black and about to fall off, right? Whenever I see them.
There's some disgusting feet when you look around the changing room, isn't there?
It takes someone like, I love them, I think they're fantastic rather than disgusting, but that's probably why I do what I do. There's a lot of information out there. I'm genuinely a believer that people do things if they see value in it, and they don't do things. So most people's biggest complaint on criticism of this is not a football thing, of their patients, is that they didn't do the homework. And I would say if your patient's coming to you and going, I didn't do my homework this week, then what you need to recognize is that they're not the problem. The problem is they didn't see any value in what you're giving them. And then if they don't see the value in it, then there's no point asking them to do it again, because they still won't do it again. And the reason they don't feel value is because they didn't actually feel benefit. So a lot of people they'll do this. I'm all happy. I'm having my treatment. You've shown me that I need to do this. I'm happy to go and do that. 2 days later, I've got the same problem. I'm going to come and see you in a week. I'm going to tell you I didn't do my exercises because it still hurts. And then the practitioner then spins on it and goes, well, you should have been doing your homework. And they come to me and they go, I'm so annoyed because nobody ever does the homework. I go, they always do my homework. They always do it. And whether they're doing it correctly or not is a big different conversation, because I'm asking them to move their whole body in one foul moment. But they've got something. They go, oh, this makes sense. I understand why I need to do it. I understand what I need to do, and I can feel benefits. And most people, if they don't feel the benefit, are on the phone pretty quick. I don't, and sometimes it's got worse, and I'm like, you need to come straight back in because something's changed, and we'll just work with that. But I think that's worth considering. And so the reason I'm saying that is because there's a lot of information out there that is foot orientated that people just don't do because it hurts, or they don't get any value from it. And so the only reason you're going to get value from it is if it makes a difference. And the only reason you're going to know if it makes a difference is if you understand your feet. Because at the moment, they're just this thing, this extension on the end of the leg that kicks a ball and you run around on, right? That's it. You don't necessarily, I never forget, I do say this again occasionally, but a young personal trainer girl, I wonder if she ever hears this, because I say it all the time, and if she even knows and goes, oh my God. But she said, I asked her, how many people, do you know how many bones are in the foot? And she said, how many joints are in the human foot? I think it was the question. And she said 2. And I said, okay, can you tell me what they are? She said foot and ankle. And I was dumbfounded, just like, wow, okay. But actually, that's all they really know. That's all they've really got. They know there's some toes. They know there's this thing. They don't know if there's 1 bone, 2 bones, 26 bones. And they're not educated around it. So, and then I'll stand in a room of 40 body workers and say, put your hands up if you're confident that you know about feet. And whether it's because they're in my presence or they actually genuinely didn't know, I think 3 hands up have gone up in 10 years. Right? The people that I don't know about feet, we just don't know about it. And so how can you get your people engaged in feet if you honestly don't know? And what you're doing is effectively going to YouTube, getting some exercises, rolling your plantar fascia with a lacrosse ball and scrunching towels, trying to do a Janda short foot exercise, but not knowing really what goes into that exercise and how we can make it happen. And the next part of my conversation is that I want you to be able to have this movement in your feet unconsciously. Because if you're going to go and play football, forget football, if you're going to go and walk to the bus, you can't be pronating and supinating your foot with deliberate action. We can't even walk down the road and text at the same time. We can't. And so what you've asked is a really nice little question, but it's massive. Is can we educate? Let's just every player in the Premier League, in the English Football League, in one club, on how their feet move, how to check it, how to use it, and how to move it, and what to do. And so all movement. I've recently posted if you can't get weight through your first metatarsal head, it means you don't have the access to a foot tripod. That's normally the first thing to do. The first thing we do is to check, have you got a foot tripod on the ground? It's your first metatarsal, your fifth metatarsal, and your heel. And a lot of conversations I've seen, I mentioned it on Instagram recently. We've had a few conversations recently, and so people go, I don't have it. So the next thing they'll try and do is to push that onto the ground. And as soon as they're pushing it onto the ground, that's a conscious decision. And weirdly, I don't think we necessarily learn from the conscious action too much. Or if we do, we go back into that learning model of 1500 reps for a conscious thing. But if we will use the wedges, like I talked about, shoving the yoga mat under that lady's foot, if you just bring the ground up to that metatarsal and start to do your movements, you create that unconscious change. And your brain has an experience of the tripod on the ground. The foot bones relax and they start to move differently because they've got the permission of having the tripod on the ground. And then all of a sudden that can start to resonate with movement up through the body. And so that just that level of education is, if I was a footballer and I'd want to get out of bed every day and check if my tripod's down today. And so when I put my foot forward and bend my knee, is my foot pronating? Is this bone going in that direction? And I know it might not be for everyone, but the players that I have worked with, that's what they do. That's their going on in the back of their mind. And they'll take these wedges and make sure that their feet are moving, but they're also learning through the process that we go through together how their body stacks up on top of that. And because they start to add so much value to it, then they start to find themselves in a really good understanding of their body. And back to taking ownership of their body, that's my key thing. So like I said, that like the physios at the club, they're there for firefighting, strength and conditioning, they're there for making sure they're ready for the game. If the player can actually make sure his bits are working and it's actually effective. It's been very effective.
I think that's a really fascinating discussion, the unconscious movement, because I'm sure there's many people out there that will have been through an injury and gone through a stage of rehab where they've done something and they just feel like, oh, this isn't doing anything for me. I don't feel like I'm getting anywhere. And like you say, and I'm trying to tie this in with my rehab, and I'm just making this really selfish now and just tying it in with what I've been going through, because why not? But
yeah.
There's things that I've done in a rehab process where I'm like, I don't really feel like I'm getting anything from this, but really focusing on it and trying to understand everything that's going on. And then simply just being able to move and get around the house and step upstairs and things like that, the progress just seems to have just elevated. So I think that ties in with what you're saying, doesn't it? The conscious and unconscious movements.
Yeah. I use the word permission quite a lot. Like, can you give that part permission to move? Does that give it permission to heal? And also, what was Achilles you said, wasn't it, for you? Yeah. So ultimately, really, like, am I still engaged in the habitual unconscious movement habit that led to the stresses that were being put on that? So even post surgery and rehab, you might find that you are still kind of betrothed to that movement, because it's the one that feels safest, and it has a reason for doing that because of something else that it's been working around. And so you might ultimately, your ultimate rehab, once you're good and strong, is to find the things that it's moving around, so that you can get those moving better, so that no longer has to take the hit, if that makes sense. It's also been a constant over my years of educating people, is that I'm going to say osteopath, but it could be any. But the osteopath generally gets quite frustrated when they've got people coming back with the same problem all the time. They've worked really hard, assessed really hard, trained really hard. They know everything they need to know, and they're making this thing that should make sense to the problem. But as soon as that person gets up and engages in their closed chain on the ground unconscious movement habits, they're just putting that adjustment back in. Does that make sense? Because that's what we need to actually override, is how do I use my body? Sometimes talk about I with the opinion, and it, the body, the vehicle that you kind of, I don't know, it wasn't you actually mentioned the vehicle earlier, but there's I, and I can force this bone into that place, but it's just going to go, that's not going to help. No. Right? And so you go for a walk and it just does its thing, moving around its problems, and you're doing all this stuff that you've been told to do that you think you should do, but it's not actually working. So there'd be definitely a layer underneath in that unconscious conversation that we can start to tap into, and people can start to tap into for themselves, because you don't then need to talk about it, you just need to move it. And so I've mentioned wake your feet up, and I'm not shy of hiding away from selling these things, because I've made them really, really cheap and really accessible, so that as many as people as possible can actually begin to take ownership of their body, because that ticks my values. And so we have wake your feet up, which is the best way that people can learn, the simplest things people can learn to do about their foot anatomy, as we've, to answer your previous question. And this question is starting to go into wake your body up, which is more an upper body thing, movement, pelvis, spine, rib cage, skull, obviously neck. And what this program is, it details the integration between your pelvis and your skull all the way up. And it confines and puts limits on your movement, so that if you do as you're told, if you like, and move your body in this way, you'll start to find that you're putting movements, just by going through the assessment process even, you're putting movements in that your brain may not have experienced for a long time. So adjustment starts to happen just under the radar. And I think that's the beauty of it. So people aren't, they will, some people have got those kind of brains who go, oh, when I do this, things feel better, and then they try too hard at doing it and it doesn't work. You've got to do it in a nice way that's gentle. I mean, people have said they're really boring, these things, and I'm like, well, I'm no Joe Wick. I'm not dancing around getting all excited and putting movement on. Like, he's brilliant, but this is, it's concentrated, it's smart, it's small movements, it's specific. And what we don't want you to do a side bend to the left when you're only using 2 vertebrae, right? We want you to side bend to the left and use all of the vertebrae. That's when things make a difference. And if you were to assess 30 footballers in a squad, I guarantee in their side bends, hardly anyone is side bending with all of their vertebrae. And I guarantee that hardly any of them will be in a rested neutral position to begin with. And I guarantee that the vast majority of them will be moving around their old injuries as well. So I can't remember what that question was, but
no, I think that this is these conversations are great, and I think like the practical stuff that coaches can take away from it, because the reason I asked in terms of practical things that we can put into our routine or the way we prepare players is because I try and think about what players would do or what coaches would potentially add into a program. And I don't see it going much further than what you talked about before in terms of rolling the bottom of your feet and doing possibly like a knee to wall movement or something like that. And that's probably pretty much where it starts and stops. I could be speaking out of turn at some clubs, obviously, but that's just
they are changing, I think.
Yeah.
Subtly.
Yeah. I just think it's nice for, like you said, if players can take responsibility, I think that's a massive point. Of all ages, especially down to academy ages, I think that's really important.
Oh, totally, yeah.
But for coaches,
you as a therapist, if you're listening and consider yourself a therapist, you are not the healer. I think that's the thing that we really need to take away with. I am not the healer. I don't take ownership of anyone's results, really, because and even if I took the time to uncover what the real problem was and put a real movement into that place and something good happened, it's still because that person somewhere inside connected with it, and the brain understood the movement, recognized that actually works more beneficially than the other one, and makes a choice to move towards it. Because countless times we've done things that haven't worked or have actually regressed somebody slightly, and all of that is just information. Just keep working, keep learning. But you're at the mercy of the person's internal decision-making factory, which is, that works for me, that doesn't work for me, that's better, that isn't better. And so it's nice because you, as a therapist, again, we've met hundreds, and they'll struggle with the idea that they might not be good enough if they're not getting results. But again, it's not their responsibility. It's not your responsibility. So you can take the responsibility off yourself and put it onto them. But if you're going to do that, you have to educate them in what it is that they need. And so, you talk about academy players; they're about to go on a big journey of well, they're already on a big journey, but in high intensity, high octane injuries, and the vast majority at a young age will hand their body over to the club, and then they get moved on and they're handing their body over to another club, and another opinion, and there's a big part of it which is where they can actually begin to take ownership of it themselves, and it'd be huge for the industry.
No, definitely. And I can't remember how many years ago now, but I remember watching a video with, I think it might have been someone like Kobe Bryant's strength coach or one of the big basketballers anyway, who was talking about the importance of the big toe. And I think you've gone into this a little bit already, I think, or you've gone into it quite a lot. And I know it's going to tie in with what you've previously said, but I don't think it's a common area of the body that we think is beneficial, is it? It's something that we probably just disregard and we don't really understand it. So could you touch on that and the importance of that in terms of performance?
Absolutely. Your big toe, it ripples all the way up to your neck. I mean, if there's no more importance than that, it's the it's the muscle, the flexor hallucis longus on the underneath is the only muscle that wraps around two levers, so the ankle and the metatarsal head. Whereas that makes it, most. Forget that a sec. I may have just muddled that up in my head. But it's the most powerful lever for sure in the human body, and that makes the FHL a very powerful muscle. But of course, in order to have access to its movement, it needs to be able to do all of the things that it should be able to do. So big toe generally has 4 degrees of freedom: plantar flexion, dorsiflexion, or flexion extension. So dorsiflexion or coming up, plantar flexion pushing down, and the rotation. I don't know why I'm bumbling around with my big toe story today, but the way I think and talk about the big toe is, again, I used the word permission earlier, but a plantar flexing toe gives the whole foot permission to pronate, and a dorsiflexing toe coming up gives the foot the permission to supinate. So if you lift your big toes up and you find an arch creates, then your big toe is probably on some kind of accurate run. If the one big toe is different to the other in terms of the ranges that they can achieve, then you're instantly going to get hit into your sagittal plane. So if this toe comes up quite a lot, I will get a really good stride length with the right leg back. And if this one doesn't come up much, I'll get a really weak, not weak is the wrong word, but a short stride length. So all of a sudden, this could be right hip flexor getting overloaded from this toe, the left toe not having the range. If you lift your toes up and your, so let's say your tibia internally rotates, then you know that when you dorsiflex your toe, the supination connection is missing. If you've stubbed your toe, you push the toe in and it's compressed, then it becomes difficult to decompress, which is a requirement for a foot to pronate. So then we start to lose the pronation potential in the foot. So there's so much going on around the big toe. It's actually, it's crazy. And it goes, what we've done, it goes all the way back to 1954 when Hicks called it the windlass mechanism. And their windlass mechanism just became a 2-dimensional model. You lift the toe up, you get an arch in the foot. Your toes lifted when you're swinging your leg forward. It comes down as you bear weight on it, and it comes up again as you power off. But it's much bigger than that. There's a huge 3-dimensional knock-on to that, and as I said before, it runs all the way up to the neck. So if the toes aren't lifting up evenly, that's going to affect pelvic rotation, which is going to affect spinal rotation, which is and it's running up and up and up. So they're very interesting. I had a GB rower good number of years ago, and she was going in for back surgery. She was out of the boat and they wanted her to go for surgery, and for whatever reason, I can't remember why now, she came to us, and she was like this with one toe just wouldn't come up, and in the same way as this one's up, so this leg came back nice and easily, which meant that she always compressed into that left lumbar side, and that was where and so what we did is we got the toes to be level. So this could be distracting it, could be mobilizing it, but critically you're teaching that when it goes up, you're teaching the foot bones to articulate into a supination. When it goes down, you're encouraging it to pronate again. The stride length turns out, we had to teach her to not hike on the left and hike a bit more on the right, which is essentially to be able to get the toe up and supinate on the left foot, and then all the pressure came out of her low back. And so again, if you're looking at a back problem, we need to start thinking that we're looking at a whole body problem, and then we need to assess the whole body to find where it is. But toes, yeah, the big toe essentially is crucial. And it definitely needs assessing.
So it's pretty important.
I don't like to give one structure importance over another. I mean, I've seen, in inverted commas, people held prisoner over a finger break, right? But it was that the conversation I was muddling around with is the fact that it's got these two fulcrums makes it a very powerful lever. Don't have that going on. So I was introduced to the big toe as the most important joint in the human body, and that led to the concept that the flexor hallucis longus must be the most powerful in the human body because of how much it has to deal with. But I've kind of dropped those. I'll probably keep them here, which makes me such a big fan of the big toe. But I would never say that the big toe is more important than, if your talus is out of position, maybe that overrides the big toe because the toe then can't do anything. But if a vertebrae is forward in your spine, which has caused a pelvis to anterior tilt, which is going to make it difficult to posterior tilt, which is going to make it difficult to externally rotate your legs, going to make it difficult to lift the toes up. So all of these connections, I hope people hear them, and they're actually really obvious connections to make. But if you're just looking at the back problem or the pelvic tilt problem, then you might miss the toe unless you've got a strategy to look at everything.
No, I think that's great. And tying into that as well, I just wanted to get your thoughts on barefoot training, because this is something that has got more and more popularized in the last few years. You see companies making footwear that is designed around barefoot and being encouraged to be barefoot as much as possible. So is that something that you'd recommend players to do when they're at home, away from the pitch, things like that?
Yeah, I'm definitely pro barefoot, definitely. But I'm also not anti shoe, which is I think a lot of people, they go barefoot and everything else is ditched, no shoes. It's like I like vegetables, but I wouldn't not eat meat. So I like to get that in there because I mean, we've been in lockdown, so to put a timestamp on this, been in lockdown for 10 weeks. And I've been barefoot the whole time. So completely pro barefoot. I'm sure many people have, and I'm sure that might have benefited a lot of people actually from not having to put their restricting shoes on. But I think footwear is a different conversation to barefoot. But with a distributor for barefoot shoes that I know he used to do it. I remember saying to him, look, if you walk barefoot over a force platform, you get the data. You see where the pressures are. You can see the gait line, how it journeys through the foot. And then if you put the barefoot shoe on and walk over the same plate, you can see very similar data. So the barefoot shoe doesn't change the way your foot moves. And so he said, rightly so. So it does exactly what it says on the tin. So, yeah, brilliant. So the barefoot shoe replicates your barefoot movement. So my next question is how good is your barefoot movement? And is your barefoot, are the shoes the things that are going to make your bare feet more mobile? And if you go into the barefoot world, is more mobile what we're looking for, because generally what you'll find is they're trying to make them stronger and rigid to be able to tolerate. But if you make it strong and rigid, you're losing the benefit that is brought to a foot by being mobile. So a foot's optimal environment is to be a mobile adapter, to adapt to any surface in a mobile way, and then to transform itself into a rigid lever through the contraction of all the tissues, which is called supination. And so what we don't want is a rigid foot that's barefoot, that you're exercising to strengthen the tissues up and just end up with these gnarly feet. We still want beautifully flowing, freely articulating, unconsciously moving feet. So at that point, if you've got that, that's when I start to lose the passion around shoes, because now my foot is able to dominate the shoe rather than the shoe dominate my foot. And I think that's the argument. A lot of people, they call them like foot coffins, is you're putting your foot in a shoe, but that shoe is dominating your foot due to that foot's lack of awareness and movement potential. And so if we go back to this conversation sounding very, I honestly think I've just repeated myself for 15 years, so we might as well do it in the podcast. But if you take wake your feet up, you're going to move your foot bones in a way that inspires all the tissue, because joints act, muscles react. If you can teach your feet bones to move, the tissue will start to respond. When I sat down to document, based on what I now know about feet, I'm going to sit down in 2008 or 9 and look at the foot muscles, because some are flexors, some are extenders, some are supinators, some are pronators, some are everters. And I was completely blown away at what we thought foot muscles do. They do nothing of the sort. Absolutely nothing of the sort. They are, the vast majority are completely and solely interested in slowing down pronation and contracting from that lengthened pronated state to formulate a supination. They're nearly all supinators. Peroneus longus, which we know as an evert, is not an everter of the foot. You can't evert the whole foot because there's an oppositional requirement in the closed chain that's required. So it's actually a supinator. It's a strong supinator of the foot. So again, if you think that you know what peroneus longus is, and if someone's got a sore peroneus longus and you do what you think you should, but actually what it should do is completely different, what it does do is completely different to what you thought it was, then you need to change your exercises and your movements to deal with that thing. So long-term peroneus longus sufferers, we need to do the opposite thing generally. So getting your bones moving the tissue, moving the foot, and then you won't need to worry about your footwear. But I would still advocate being barefoot, because your feet get to express themselves fully, I suppose.
Yeah, I love that. I love the whole idea around that. And you're right, this period has probably proved it to a lot. That I was just saying yesterday, I think it was, the amount of time I spent barefoot, and everyone's joking about not getting changed and putting jeans on and all the rest of it. But it's the same about our feet, isn't it? We've probably not put footwear on that we normally wear. And I'm lucky I don't wear suits and things to work. But when people do,
like, you're only wearing your t-shirt today.
yeah, that's why I've gone from here upwards.
There's even a crop top.
Yeah. Exactly. But no, I think it's right. It ties in perfectly. And I think there's so much good information in that, Gary, and I really appreciate you coming on, because I love the discussions on it. I think there's so much more we could delve into, but and potentially get a part 2 in the future as well, because I think there's, like I said, there's a lot more that we can go into with that. But some of the information there in terms of practically applying it for coaches that they could take into their practice straight away, I think there's loads. So I really do appreciate you coming on. And I know you've mentioned it a few times in terms of some of the courses and the resources. Where can we get hold of those?
So the website is www.findingcentre, spelled the English way, centre.co.uk. And on there's a tab for AIM education, and you'll see wake your feet up, wake your body up, and also what I haven't mentioned is our first online course, which we patched together quite impressively, I have to say. for lockdown, because we can't teach at the moment. We don't know when we'll be able to open doors again for that. So we're starting to put all our material online, which will hopefully lead to more knowledgeable intake. When we next get to meet students, they'll kind of already know quite a lot of stuff, which, great, we can probably move further than we ever done before. So that course is called the Closed Chain Biomechanics of the Lower Limb. And we'll take you through a journey of a lot of what I've been talking about today, from the big toe all the way up to the pelvis. And we'll be doing the upper body next, which will complete that journey up. So first of all, we want to give people a good understanding about the integrated movement connections that we experience from head to toe. And then later we'll be able to start to show how that evolves through the walking cycles. So hopefully that's a nice introduction to people who are interested or want to learn more.
No, that's brilliant. And I encourage people to go and check it out. And in terms of yourself on social media, Gary, is there anywhere that the guys can follow you?
Yeah, so Instagram seems to be the big one, at Gary Ward _AIM. We also have an Anatomy in Motion Facebook page, which is like I don't know what they call them anymore, like page, used to call them a fan page. And that's it really, pretty much what we do. I don't use Twitter anymore. I was put off that a long time ago.
Awesome. I'll put all the links out so people can follow you easily. But no, I really appreciate you coming on and being so open with your discussions there, because I think that, like I said, there's loads to take away from it and plenty more that we can discuss as well. So we'll stay in touch and hopefully get you on again in the future.
Yeah, I'd love that. It's really enjoyable. Thank you very much, Ben. Enjoyed it.
Thanks, Gary. Take care.
Bye-bye, mate.